All right, ladies and gentlemen, so while this PowerPoint loads, I just wanted to address where we were before. So we just finished P1, L1, or Period 1, Lesson 1, and we talked about the initial settlement of the United States by different peoples in Asia and Polynesia, and how those countries became populated and developed these massive civilizations. But in 1492, essentially, we have this clash of these two separate worlds that have been functioning independently of each other. And Europe is really a brand new continent as far as their countries are concerned. A lot of them are young rulers who are eager to make wealth for their countries and establish themselves in the world. And I'll talk a little bit about mercantilism today and why they thought that way. So as Portugal and Spain started making more money, other countries in the world started to say, hey, we should try to find a route to the Indies too, because they found all this stuff in the meantime. So we need to figure out a way to develop wealth for our nation. Because there was this belief that there's only a finite amount of wealth in the world, meaning there's only so much, and to make sure that your country is secure and powerful, you need to have a slice of it. And so you start to see countries try to go, but as they realize that they can't get there that way, the French, English, and Dutch all decide to establish colonies in North America instead. So it's a very different perspective as far as what they're going to do and a different way of extracting wealth and dealing with problems back home. Okay, so a colony is a country or area under full or partial control of a mother country. Typically, it's one that's far away, and the purpose of that colony is to provide wealth for the mother country. Usually, it is occupied by settlers from the mother country as well, whether that is a business endeavor or it is actually settlement. Okay, so why was exploration such a big deal to Europeans? I already kind of mentioned this, but economic and political factors are going to be the major one. First off, the driving idea behind exploration is going to be this mercantilist idea. This was an economic system. And what they believed is that there was only so much money to go around, that wealth couldn't be created, it existed. And so in order to give your nation security, you needed to make sure you got a piece of it. And if one country got more of it than you, then your nation was less secure. It was this idea of balance of power, that if we all have equal amounts of money, then we're not going to go to war with each other, which was never the case, but it's what they believed. Also, you're going to have different social and economic factors within these countries that are going to encourage those countries to do what they do. Okay, so our goal for today is to know the similarities and differences between the French, English, and Dutch colonies in North America. Spanish colonies primarily are going to be focused on cash crops and conversion and be in the southern part of the country and the west coast. So California is heavily influenced by Spain. We are going to look at some of the eastern seaboard colonies with the French, the English, and the Dutch, and how that developed patterns in the nation that we see today. Okay, so examining these artifacts. So this is a sketch of from a French colony. So based on what you're seeing, what were the French colonies in North America like? Okay, so I'm seeing praying Native American women. It looks like there's kind of an intermixing of white men and Native American men and women. I definitely see a cross and what appears to be a Catholic monk. So it looks like, based on this, that we're going to have kind of a cordial relationship with the French and the Native Americans. Okay, same here. So what we're still looking at the French colonies. So we've got some white people who look like they're making a record. We've got a Native American down on the floor who's smoking tobacco, it looks like. They're both smoking tobacco. And you also have what appears to be a trade of furs happening in the photo or sketch. It's called something, I can't think of the name. Okay, so in the 1600s, the French explorer Samuel de Champlain is going to fail to find a northwest passage through Canada. So there's this belief that they don't know that like Iceland, Greenland up at the top exists. And so they want to try to get through Canada to get to Asia. They're unsuccessful. So they decide to establish the colony of Quebec. If you go to Quebec today, French is still one of the primary languages spoken in this city. There were 28 colonists who established there. 20 of them died in the first winter. So of the 28, you have 20 who die in that first winter. France claimed land from Canada to New Orleans and controlled the territory along the Mississippi River. So I want you to follow my cursor here. Okay, so they're going to follow that all the way down to New Orleans. Okay, so all the way up through the lakes, Quebec. Why would it have been important? Think about this just for a second. Why would it have been important for them to control the Mississippi River? We don't know a lot about the Mississippi River yet, but why would it be important for them to control a long stretch of river like that? Okay, so why did the French colonize in America? Most French colonists are going to profit from the fur trade. It's huge. Small scale farming, lumbering. They're going to extract resources from the New World. But because the French needed furs, they were mostly friendly with local Native Americans because they knew the land. And the French are going to dominate the fur trade, and it is big, big, big money. There are furs that you can only access in North America that are softer, warmer, larger than anything you could have found in continental Eurasia or Africa, that are going to be particularly popular during this time period. So furs are going to become kind of the luxury of the time, and they had a monopoly on the market. French colonists also had to be Catholic. Okay, so there's this in the world, if we're kind of going back in time, there's this conflict in Europe between Protestants, so like the English and the Dutch and the Germans, and people who have continued with the Catholic faith going all the way back to the Holy Roman Empire, like the French, the Italians, as well as and the Spanish and the Portuguese are all Catholic. And the Catholic branch of Christianity in particular has a very strong evangelical or need to spread its ideas and convert people. So you had to be a Catholic to be able to go, because the goal was to try to convert Native Americans. And few people are going to to immigrate to America for several reasons. One, if any of you have ever seen The Revenant, fur trading was hard. It was hard, it was dangerous. It really was only attractive and available to single men. And so you're going to see a lot of intermarrying because families are not settling in these areas. So this friendly relationship is going to allow the French to dominate that big money trade. Okay. So like Spain, the French colonists are going to focus on wealth and converting Indians to Catholicism. The goal is to convert and to extract wealth. We're not trying to establish new France. We have plenty of land. France is a massive country when it compares to the rest of Europe. And so they didn't need more land. They needed more wealth. French colonial governments were strictly controlled by the King of France. So there was no freedom on the ground. It was controlled by the King of France, and he ruled through royal governors. So they were also all dominated by single men. There was not local governments that were happening. It's also important to note, just kind of as we move forward, that these connectors from the Great Lakes through Canada down the Mississippi is like a super highway. It is deep, it is wide, it is steady, and it is perfect for trade. You can take things all the way across the majority of the country down this river. And you'll notice that particularly places like Louisiana, which was a French colony, are going to have different common law than the rest of the country. So like if you are watching the news right now, we're going through a hurricane. They'll talk about Louisiana, they talk about parishes. In French common law, they don't call them counties. So like we are under British common law, so we call different regions within a state a county. But in Louisiana, they call it a parish. And a parish is an area overseen by a priest. a Catholic priest. Okay, so you have the king, you have those royal governors, and then all of these people are coming from the top down. You have leadership coming from France. It is not led by the locals. Okay, so examining these artifacts, the Dutch, we won't have talked about them at all at this point, but the Dutch are unique in world history, and that they're about the money. They don't care what religion you are. They don't care what your belief system is. If your money is green, we like you. So, looking at this artifact, what were the Dutch colonies in North America like? So what we're observing, we see ships. So we see shipping ports. If we look closer, we see lots of houses, very densely populated to these trading ports. You can see all these places where you can park ships and cities that are going to be processing those goods. The number one goal, like I said, for the Dutch is trading. And Native Americans are going to be a big part of that. They utilize relationships with Native Americans and people from other cultures. The Dutch were very tolerant, even though they were Protestant. They'd work with Catholics. They'd work with Native Americans. They'd work with Buddhists. They'd work with Muslims, whoever. Like I said, if your money is green. So you see a major staple with trade in their colonies. Okay, so the Dutch are going to be the New England, New Amsterdam area. So New York. If you think about what the history is even today with trade and how we kind of see it in the United States anyways, like the center of the world and the center of culture, the Dutch created the colony in present-day New York, then called New Amsterdam, and then became New Netherlands, and then became New York when the British are going to take it over. Okay, so again, we see just a flourishing port city for trade. Okay, so for the Dutch, their why was to attract settlers. The Dutch government allowed anyone, regardless of religion or nation, to immigrate and granted political freedom to their colonists. So this is going to be a major difference. When you get to the mainland of what we now consider the United States, those early colonies are going to be established in this idea that there's a certain level of political and religious freedom. Remove me. So as a result, New Netherlands was one of the most diverse and free colonies in America. Okay, and that's going to be the case for a long time. So, New Amsterdam is going to be created by a joint stock company. So that's the same way, like if you were to buy stock in a company today, say you buy 5 stocks in Disney, a joint stock just means that multiple people have invested in a company in order to make money from that company. So it is not like established in freedom in America and, flags and eagles and all of that. It's established based in capitalism. So this company is owned by a group of investors and the purpose is to make money. It is called the Dutch East India Company, and it is most famous for trading tea. They are going to trade all around. They're basically going to take over all of the ports from the Portuguese around the African coastline as Portugal loses its strength. Okay, so now we're going to check out the British colonies for a second. So what are we seeing? We see a very different picture. We see a ship out here in the water. So they're on the coastline. But if we observe here, we see a very different life. We see what appears to be a husband and a wife. Looks like a family farm. These leaves, for those of you who are not familiar, are tobacco leaves. So they're farming tobacco. It looks like a much slower, family-centered life. And then looking at this image, what do we see? So we see some type of pastor. For those of you who are familiar, you're going to notice that this is a very different outfit from like what a priest would wear. So this is going to be a minister, a pastor, a Protestant Christian leader. Okay, and you see that you've got men and women intermingled, you've got children, you've got a woman holding a book. This seems insignificant, but it's a really important idea. This whole idea in Protestantism that everybody should be able to read the Bible. And so there's this really intense, religious, almost rebellious, anti-Catholic sentiment in the British colonies. Okay, so the English. Like the Dutch, the British are going to settle America through joint stock companies. So the initial goal is not to establish settlements. They have the British East India Tea Company. Eventually, they're going to buy the Dutch East India Company, but it's a joint stock company. So essentially, it is established to make money. Okay, so British colonies to America, they came for a wide variety of reasons. I'm sorry that this got blocked. Okay, but first, colonists came to America to escape poverty, wealth, or to gain land. So here's the thing. Britain is a tiny, 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 tiny country. But now, with all of this food pouring into Europe from the from the Colonial exchange, you have a massive boom of population in Europe, and there's just not enough room for everybody. And that even affects even an individual family, particularly people who are from the gentry, who are nobles. Because if you're not the firstborn son, if you're the secondborn son, you have no right to any land. You have nothing to your name. Everything goes to the older son. But land ownership is the key to notoriety and prestige in British society. So what you're going to find is that older brothers are going to sponsor younger brothers to go over to the Americas and make their fortune. And so that's why you have all of these places named like New York. They become governors of these big tracts of land in the Americas. And then some are going to come for religious freedom to flee religious persecution. So there's an enormous amount of religious persecution. There's this big gap between 1492 and when we see our first like successful colonies from the British. And that's because there's an enormous amount of things happening in England. You have the Reformation, which is going all through Europe, that essentially is challenging everything that's ever been believed. And then now you have infighting, and the English are having a civil war. And so these fringe groups, these particularly groups like the Pilgrims and the Puritans, who had these really extreme religious views, wanted to get away from these mainstream ideas. And so they were able to settle and basically be left alone for a fair amount of time. So as a result, the British colonies are going to be very different from each other because the purposes are different. They were never really unified. So we kind of categorize them into three groups. You have the New England colonies. These New England colonies are going to be focused on like family life. You have the middle colonies, which are much more focused in trade and influenced by the Dutch. And then you have the southern colonies, which are joint stock colonies. They were established and run like a business. Okay, so the first successful colony for the British is going to be at Jamestown. We're going to talk a little more about this another day. But in the Pocahontas movie, they depict the establishment of Jamestown. Unfortunately, I hate to break your heart, but the story of Pocahontas is not a real story. And in fact, the real story is kind of gross. She was like 12 years old. John Smith was like way older. And Pocahontas actually means trouble child. And so the British, they saw, the giving of Pocahontas as a gift. But really, I think it was kind of potentially a way to get rid of his troublesome daughter. It was almost like a slap in the face, so to speak. You look at the nuance of it. Okay, so here's the thing. In the colonies, Britain developed a policy called salutary neglect. And basically what this meant is we don't want to pay to run your government. So we're going to let you go there. You're going to be controlled by us, but we're not going to pay money to run your government. So we're going to give you some freedom to decide how you want to rule yourself. So at the top, you have the British crown. So you have whoever the king is, and then you have a local governor appointed by the king and is going to oversee colonial trade. Let me move myself really quick. Okay. Final approval on laws, but could dismiss a colonial assembly. But for the most part, their taxes and their local laws were decided at home. So they kind of got that taste of freedom. So you have the British colonies who have that freedom to make those choices. So they have a council appointed by the governor, an advisory board, and act as at the highest court. And then you have the assembly, these people that are elected within regions. They're paid to be full-time politicians. They make laws. They have the authority to create taxes. And so really the colonies were kind of left to their own devices to make decisions. Okay, royal governors were sent by the king, but they really had little power. Like, it wasn't like they were super influential. And they didn't have representation in parliament back home. Okay, so societies and economies of the British colonies were dependent upon the reasons that people settled. Okay, so southern colonies like Virginia had cash crop economies, so large gaps between the rich and the poor, the farmers and slave labor. Okay, this is still a system that exists in the South today. You have kind of this idea of like the gentry, like old money, the fancy people, and then you basically have everybody else. There's these massive gaps in wealth. You're either wealthy or you're not. There's not as much independent middle class wealth in that particular culture. Then the New England colonies, like Massachusetts, they are going to be closely connected by religion, families, with an economy based largely on subsistence farming. So they are farming, but they're farming to survive. That's what subsistence farming means. Ooh, well, what did I do? So unlike the Spanish, the British, or the Spanish or the French, the British are never going to try to intermarry with Native Americans. And there's almost this belief that they're like evil and practice witchcraft, especially with kind of this heightened like religious fervor that they're dealing with. And so they don't marry the locals, they don't trade with the locals, they don't interact with the locals. And so there's an enormous amount of conflict over land, because Native Americans do not see land the same way. They see land as a communal resource, whereas the British in particular, but really Europeans overall, see land as something that must and should be owned. Okay, so major goals in the New World. France, fur trading in Canada, big money. Their goal was not to establish colonies. Okay, and then the Netherlands, so the Dutch, their goal is to make money through trade, equality, and more money. Money, 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 money. That's what the Dutch do. Okay, and then in England, the big thing is you have those overcrowding issues because it's a tiny country. And so there's this pattern of indentured servitude, and we'll talk more about this later, where they send a rich person will sponsor a poor person to come over to the Americas, and in return for that money, they essentially serve a period of slave labor to pay off their debt, and then they are free to make their own life in the Americas. So that it's going to attract both wealthy and poor people. And again, there's also going to be religious conflict. For Spain, sugar plantations spread Catholicism. That's something you can also add for France. Spain was about money. It was a young country. They needed to establish themselves. They needed to protect themselves based on their experiences. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to look at some examples here. So you're going to review the Spanish and French colonies with a series of potential immigrants to North America. Okay, so for each immigrant, determine what region that they should belong to. Okay. So, potential immigrant number one, a poor unmarried man looking to make his fortune. Okay. Where could he potentially fit? A poor unmarried man looking to make his fortune. Okay, well, there's a few places that he could fit. He could fit into a Spanish colony. Let me make sure. And we're going to focus this on main American colonies. So a poor unmarried man looking to make his fortune is probably either going to go to a French colony in the north, or he might go to the American South and work for a joint stock company to establish himself. Okay, a person with very religious beliefs. This person is likely going to go to those northern colonies, those New England colonies. those far northern colonies established by the Pilgrims and the Puritans. Okay, a woman looking for new opportunities in America. Okay, so you have the really religious North, you have the middle colonies established by the Dutch, and you have the southern colonies established by joint stock. If I were a woman looking for opportunities, I'm going to go to the Dutch colonies. Because the Dutch did not have the same views about women that the British or the Spanish or even the French did. There was this equality, this egalitarian mood. Okay, potential immigrant number 8. I feel like we skipped something. An entrepreneur looking for a location to open a business specialized in shipping. Okay, which area specialized in shipping? Shipping and trading. That's going to be the Dutch colonies. Okay, remember we looked at that New York port and you saw all of those different places. Okay, a person looking for political freedom and the ability to help make laws. Okay, we are definitely going to go to the British colonies for that. Particularly, really any of the British colonies. I want some political freedom. I want some choices. I want the ability to make my own laws. So I'm going to go with salutary neglect because that's what they're allowing me to do. Okay, if you are a Native American looking for freedom from European control. Well, if I'm going to go to a colony, I'm going to go to the French because the French are not trying to control me. They're just trying to make money from me. Okay, potential immigrant number 2, a person who enjoys living where the action is, a place where something exciting is always happening. You probably, I don't know, you got a few options there. You could be in the Dutch colonies if you're into like the hustle and bustle of the city, or if you like, if you like kind of more of a fierceness and like a conquistador mentality, you'd be with the Spanish. Father looking for safety and security for his family, he's going to go north. Okay, so fact check this really quick. What I want you to do in your notes is I want you to identify one characteristic that is representative of a French colony in North America, of a Dutch colony, of a British colony. Okay, so what makes them unique? All right, ladies and gentlemen, I will see you next class period. Have a great one.